This video is about the Deification Ritual in Elden Ring. The creator Tarnished Archaeologist, hallowed be his name, has posted a video about this subject. Though we share many similar views, this video will take a few more leaps of faith in an attempt to paint a clearer picture. I believe I've reached a conclusion that is both consistent with the hard evidence in the game, and is also thematically and narratively satisfying. It's going to get pretty abstract at times, with heavy speculation, but if you stick with me, I promise it will be worth it. For obvious reasons, judging by the nature of the content, we're talking about an obscure occult ritual in a fantasy video game that is famous for being vague. Obviously, everything I'm about to say is pure hard science, fact-checked, and peer-reviewed by independent researchers. But take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt anyway. What separates the mortals from the divine? In framing the question as mortals versus divine, the answer becomes self-evident. Gods do not die, they are above death. The gods are transcendent and beyond. Gods often represent something ineffable about nature, and it is no coincidence that most ancient religions include natural gods such as thunder, storm, the sun and the moon, and of course, fire. In my hometown, typhoons are a real problem. Year after year, my family has to live with the fact that every so often, the air gets really angry, and it just might blow out your power supply for a week. Each individual typhoon may eventually pass, but typhoons as a concept does not go away. They have been around since the beginning of time, and they will still be here long after we're gone. The word typhoon traces its origin back to the Greek monster Typhon, the serpentine giant that tried to destroy the world. He's the son of Earth Mother Gaia and Tartarus, the Greek equivalent of the abyss. Some might even call Typhon an abyssal serpent, but that's for another video. Suffice to say that these grand concepts do not die as we small mortals do. So what hopes do we mortals have in attaining godhood? Well, if you look into real-world religious history, the answer is clear. To become a god, one must transcend death. Think about the stories of Jesus, the Buddha, and Hercules. In Elden Ring, however, that is still not quite enough. But before I get ahead of myself, let me start with the basics first. To understand how Marika and her children eventually become the gods of their age, we need to start at the very beginning. Because a lot of what we're about to dive into is very abstract, we're going to have to do some poorly produced infographics. So I apologize for the presentation in advance. And I also apologize to the audience who are just listening in. I highly recommend you look at your devices from time to time. I promise it will be a worthy endeavor. In the beginning, there was only the One Great. The One Great is like the primordial chaos. It is singular and without parts. The One Great could be understood as the singularity where everything was blended together. More on that later. But then, fracture. Just like how fire brought about disparity in the Dark Souls universe, the Greater Will divided and distinguished existence into being. The Greater Will represents the concept of order. It is a grand and almost all-encompassing idea. Think of order like the physical laws of our world, things like fundamental forces and so on. Without order, reality will literally collapse onto itself. And it is for this reason that technically, everything that exists because of the Greater Will. This is the reason that runes, the fundamental building block of existence, are golden. There is no existence without the Greater Will. On a side note, although this is only tangentially related to the topic, I would like to talk about the outer gods a little bit. To put it simply, all of the outer gods, with the exception of one, can be thought of as children of the Greater Will, because all of them represent some form of order. Take Rot, for example. The essence of Rot is change. Rot is the forceful change during times of stagnation. At its core, Rot cannot exist without the concept of distinction. A thing cannot be changed into another thing if everything is the same. Therefore, Rot can only exist after the Greater Will divided the singular One Great. If you do this exercise with all the other outer gods, you will find very similar results. This is why all of the other outer gods' rule can be incorporated into the Elden Ring. The one exception, of course, being the Frenzy Flame. Frenzy exists on the same plane as the Greater Will. It is a reaction to an action. The Greater Will creates, the Frenzy annihilates. Frenzy is not death, it is oblivion. Just like the Tai Chi Yin Yang, As long as the greater will exists, the frenzy will endure. All things yearn eternally to converge, after all. Speaking of dualism, in the world of the Elden Ring, life consists of both the body and the soul. Souls are runes, which are also memory, will, fate, and atom. Atoms not in the way we understand them today, but in their Greek original meaning. They are the basic building blocks of reality. So when I refer to fate, will, souls, and runes, know that I'm more or less referring to the same concept. Check out Nameless Singer's videos for more on this idea. This is where we step into theory territory. I think the world in Elden Ring is also dualistic in nature. Although there isn't a clear-cut reference to something like an afterlife in the game, I think there is sufficient indirect evidence to support this idea, the foremost of which actually come from the DLC. The Sprite Stone item description reads, "A route burrow inhabited by a sprite. Uses FP to release a sprite that slowly home in on enemies. After a short time, the sprite fades away into glittering lights, causing a spiritual explosion on its passing. According to the records left by the Hornsem scholars, there are also contrivances known as bond stones that could manipulate the moment that the sprite vanishes. The utility of this item is cosmetic at best. For such an useless item, it packs so much lore into its deceptively simple description. For the Rao scholars out there, this item serves as the introduction to the lost science of soul engineering and golemcraft. But here, I would like to focus on the passing of spirits. The spirit is said to fade away on its passing, but obviously, the spirits are not gone. Remember, spirits in this world is eternal, so what happens to it? And why does its passing cause an explosion? Well, where does the spirit of the dead supposed to go? A place of afterlife, of course. I feel a bit silly trying to explain this, since I feel this is more or less common sense. Look into basically any mythology or religion from anywhere, and you'll find mountains of stories about a separate realm of the dead, and the importance of keeping this realm separated. Usually, heroes of these great myths have to go through tremendous lengths to reach this spirit realm, and their return from this realm is generally lauded as a great feat, having done something that is deemed impossible. It is only in stories of a doomsday event that we find the realm of the dead converging with the realm of the living. Think of Ragnarok, where Hel, the queen of the dead, brings a domain to invade the world. These stories emphasize our human understanding of what an underworld should be. It is not only a place of no return, but the barrier between life and death is usually considered sacred and unassailable. To do so is either going against the natural order or eviscerating divine power. There are also long-standing traditions in basically every human culture about how the dead should be treated. Indeed, funerary traditions is one of the cornerstones of culture. Herodotus, the father of history, meticulously documented many funerary rituals in an attempt to understand the diverse culture he encountered. A lot of funerary rituals are performed with the goal to facilitate the passing of the spirit to the afterlife. This is true in Herodotus' day, and it is true now. One especially pertinent example is the ancient Greeks' practice of placing a coin in the mouth of the deceased. This coin, called the Charon's oboe, is the payment for the ferryment of the dead, Charon. All that is to say that normally, meaning before America's shenanigans, when a person dies in the world of Elden Ring, if the proper rituals are performed, the spirit of the dead will naturally go on to a separate spirit realm. As to why the passing of the spirit will cause an explosion, we'll talk about this later. But for now, let's just say that the crossing between the two realms naturally causes a violent reaction. Intuitively, we all understand that there is something intrinsically wrong with the world when the dead haunt the living. By returning the spirit of the dead to what they should be, the cycle of life and death, that is, reincarnation, can continue. If the funerary rituals isn't properly performed, let's say, if the divine ghost flame you usually use for cremation suddenly loses its power for some reason, then the remains of the dead will turn putrescent. The souls of the dead cannot find rest. The deceased becomes spiritually and physically unclean. This idea isn't something new. Look into the idea of Kagari in Shinto religion and you will find very similar concepts. The common belief is that the dead doesn't want to pass on, and as long as their body is still there, they will try to stay close to their body. The will to cling on to life is so strong that even for those whose bodies have been burned into spirit ash, spirit can still be summoned back from the dead for a brief moment, at least just long enough enough for us to beat Melania, Blade of Mikola. So far, what we have discussed is pretty reasonable. A lot of this theory is based on how people think about the afterlife in our world. But here, we're talking about a fantasy world where the central story is exploring what happens when this natural cycle of life is disturbed. So let us add a pinch of fantasy to our rather mundane infographics, shall we? For you see, this somewhat plain image on the world of Elden Ring is actually inaccurate. A more precise depiction should be like this. This world is called the Lands Between, after all. If you're a fan of the manga Berserk, you might know of this place called the Interstice, a layer between the astral world, the afterlife, and the physical world. The Interstice is a mixture of the two worlds where both the dead and the living can coexist. The original Japanese for Interstice is Hazama no Sekai, suspiciously similar to the Japanese for the Lands Between, Hazama no Ji. As far as inspiration go, this one isn't really subtle. Many before me has proposed a theory that the Lands Between lies between the quote-unquote real world and the spirit world. Some have equated the Lands Between as the realm of the gods, like Asgard. Some have gone as far as to say that the Land of Shadow is the underworld. I personally wouldn't go that far, but I think the Lands Between is a mixture of the both physical world and the spirit world. But rather than thinking that the Lands Between is this limbo state between life and death, I think this is where heaven and earth overlaps, as indicated by this graph right here. I don't think everyone in the Lands Between are dead, or in some sort of transition state between going into the afterlife and being born into the physical world. Rather, regular people like Bach are still being born and dying in this world just like the physical world. It's just that the presence of the spirit realm is particularly strong in these lands. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the Land of Shadow, where all manners of death wash up. The spirit of the dead just wanders on in these lands like it's nobody's business. It is unclear as to why the Lands Between is the way it is. It's entirely possible that these lands have always been this way, that their existence is somehow cosmically ordained. There's usually no sense in questioning why the underworld exists in a mythological context. It exists because that's the logic of the world. But, and here's a big but, I tend to think that the Lands Between is made, and I will give 3 possible theories on how. First, it could be due to the Lands Between being in a post-apocalyptic world. As we have said earlier, in doomsday myths, there's usually a merging between the underworld and the physical world. The story of Ragnarok here is particularly important, but we'll explore down this lane in another day. Second, it could be due to the meddling of the Earth Tree, as the Earth Tree quite literally pulls the two realms together. This claim is somewhat substantiated by Ronnie. Ronnie says,
"As it is now, life and souls and order are bound tightly together. But I would have them at a great remove."
The Age of Star ending seems to suggest that it is possible to return the Lands Between into a pre-Earth Tree state, where the realm of the dead is separated from the realm of the living. Again, I would love to explore both Mikola and Ronnie's story in the future, as I think they are the absolute highlights of this game, but for now though, I'm more than happy to discuss these ideas in the comment section. Third, and perhaps the most relevant theory to this video, the barrier between the physical world and the spirit world in the Lands Between, or I should say particularly in the Land of Shadow, is broken due to some deliberate manipulation of the crossing of spirits. Remember, the crossing of spirits is an intrinsically violent event, so much so that it causes a spirit explosion. I believe the crossing of the spirits opens up a tier between the realm of the dead and the realm of the living. This could be the same base mechanic that made the Land of Shadow so spiritual. In a very physical sense, this is where all the boat burials will wash down from Shiofra and Ensel rivers. Presumably, the spirit of the dead will cross to the other side in the Land of Shadow. Normally, this will be fine. Graveyards and burial grounds are naturally a little haunted, sure, but that's just what you would expect. But clearly, there's something very wrong in the Land of Shadow. You wouldn't expect to see spirit graves and lava tears materialize out of thin air, or physical spirits wandering the realm trying to kill you. Something cosmically wrong has gone down in these lands. And I think, maybe, just maybe, it has something to do with that tower that is supposed to, quote, reach onto heaven, end quote, and whatever it is on top of that damn tower. We'll get there, I promise, but before we climb the tower, there's still one crucial aspect we need to discuss. I've referred to the cycle of life as reincarnation in this video, but reincarnation in the lands between is different than, let's say how the Dalai Lama works. And the key difference lies in the idea of the Crucible. There is a ton of debate as to what the Crucible actually is. It's a very esoteric concept, and a lot of people have different opinions about it. If you read through the item descriptions about the Crucible, you might feel a bit confused. You kinda get the idea, but it feels difficult to put the ideas to words. I think a lot of the ambiguity is deliberate, as I believe the game uses the word crucible rather loosely. Sometimes it seems that the word is used more metaphorically, while other times it seems to be referring to some physical thing or place. Creator Crunchy has a great video on the subject. It's a very fluid, insightful, and holistic exploration of the idea, made all the more impressive as the video is released pre-DLC. A lot of his claims in that video has proven to be prophetic, so I highly recommend it to anyone who's curious. Here though, we'll take a few more leaps of faith to construct a clear and concise framework, so we can finally peel back this veil of mystery. In the real world, a crucible is a container where metals are melted in. It is using smithing where these melted metals can be used to make something new. The analogy here isn't lost to me. In order to make sense of these esoteric texts, let us begin with the most basic idea first. I'm not going to read every text that is related to the Crucible, as there is actually quite a bit of them. When relevant item description comes up in the discussion, I'll put them on screen for your reading pleasure. Pause the video if you need to, but I am going to read the following item description as I think it is the most important one. From any aspects of the Crucible incantations, their descriptions read, "This is a manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, and aspects of the primordial Crucible, where all life was once blended together." This item description defines the Crucible as a place or thing, and its function is to blend life together. It is a deliciously, or maybe devilishly, ambiguous line of text. What does it even mean for life to blend together? What does that accomplish? And if the primordial Erdtree was once a crucible, as the Crucible X armor description suggests, could there be other crucible in the game? How have the Erdtree stopped being a crucible, so much so that being touched by the crucible now is quite literally considered a bad omen? It's a lot of question with frankly very little to go off of, but with the proper framework, the answer to all of these questions would suddenly become clear. What is key to understand here is that life in this world is dualistic in nature. Life consists of both the body and the soul. So when the game tells us that the crucible is where life blends together, we need to understand this as a dual process, the blending of flesh and the blending of souls. We can further categorize this into the crucible of flesh and the crucible of souls. We have seen quite a bit of blending of flesh in the game, perhaps a little bit too much. The Erdtree, the Divine Gateway, the Nox Night Sky, even some people can fall under this category depending how you define this. Godric, Rykard, the Jard Shamans, and maybe even the Empyreans, who can supposedly hold different aspects within themselves. But where is this blending of the souls taking place? I think the Crucible of Souls is these places of afterlife. It is the spirit realm that we've been discussing all along. To combine the idea of the afterlife and the idea of the Crucible together, the Crucible of Souls is where the souls of the dead are broken down, from an individualized entity to a dispersed collection of runes. Then these souls will be made into new souls and recycled back into the world, becoming a totally different being. The word blending inherently suggests a loss of individuality, the memory or the soul that makes the person who he is. A similar logic can be actually applied to the physical world too, where our dead bodies will one day decompose and feed the microbiomes and these small organisms, technically becoming a part of a different life form. The earth and the worms both have their claim indeed. In a grander sense, the physical world is the crucible of flesh, just like the spirit world is a crucible of souls. You can see this idea is very dynamic, and exists in this liminal space between being literal or metaphorical. And this is exactly how the game portrays the idea. It's a wonderful bit of writing, albeit a little confusing, but it all makes sense if you accept the theory that there is a separate spirit realm. Let's not forget even the souls of the Hornsens have horns. These horns are not just a genetic traits of their bodies, they are part of their very soul. You can interpret this as the process of breaking down souls is rather crude. Common features of different life forms, such as wings, horns, tails, sometimes don't get melted down to runes completely. If you are a staunch Erdtree believer, you would call these impurities. To carry on with the smithing metaphor, when liquefied under high temperature, the impurities will separate from the metal due to different densities. But if you worship the Crucible, these quote-unquote impurities will be seen as signs of the divine. This interpretation of the Crucible clarifies so much of what we know. If you work with this assumption, all those esoteric descriptions of the Crucible suddenly makes a lot more sense. This interpretation will also explain why the modern Erdtree is different from the primordial Erdtree. A lot of confusion surrounding the cycle of life and death in Elden Ring stems from the fact that the game takes place in a time where this process is greatly disturbed. Although the flesh of the dead is still recycled through the Erdtree, that breaking down souls thing, that process is gone under the modern Erdtree, where once the primordial Erdtree might have merely served as a conduit or gateway to the afterlife, the Erdtree now is the afterlife. Or more precisely, there is no afterlife. Once you partake of the Blessed Sep, you do not die in the truest sense. You never reach the Crucible of Souls. You just reincarnate over and over into yourself. Your soul is not broken down into basic runes. It is hewn to the Erdtree. Remember, the omens are thought to have been touched by the Crucible, meaning that under the new Erdtree, contact with the Crucible is an anomaly. It's not supposed to happen. The omens are denied re-entry into the Erdtree's life cycle, a testament of deliberate separation between the new Erdtree and the Crucible. This transition from the primordial Crucible Erdtree to the modern Erdtree, I think, is inherently connected with the Rune of Death being plucked from the Elden Ring. The black flame of the Rune of Death is quite literally the fire that stoked the Crucible of Souls. Again, that's a topic for another day, but I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on this matter. The primordial Erdtree and especially the Divine Gateway are a gateway to this afterlife, rather than being the afterlife itself. The Crucible of Flesh serves as a connection between this realm and the next. We'll return to this concept a little later, but for now, just know that these gateways are not built specifically to facilitate the passing of souls, although this is one of their functions. Souls can pass on to the afterlife naturally. They don't necessarily need to go through the Erdtree. The spirit realm is where the spirits are supposed to go after all. Instead, these gateways are built for a very specific purpose. But let us focus on the task at hand first. The mechanics are now all in place. Now, let us finally talk about the Deification Ritual. As per TA's lecture, and what we have implied in the intro, to become a god in Elden Ring, one needs to perform two rituals, a funeral and a marriage ceremony, resurrection and procreation. Godhood in these lands are validated by the power over life and death. Actually, this isn't so much as two rituals, but one grand ritual with two intertwined aspects. We're going to break this grand ceremony down to two parts: people and location. The first part of this ceremony is of course the participants, a god and a lord. Lord and god must ascend together into greater divinity. Of the two, the god must be a special person called the Empyrean. There are a lot of speculations surrounding the nature of Empyreans, and this is very much a hotly debated topic. So here's our 2 cents. We get the most clarifications on Empyreans from Ranni, who herself is an Empyrean. Her dialogue seems to suggest that the Empyreans are chosen by the fingers, which might imply that being chosen by the fingers would make you an Empyrean. This is not an airtight logical proof or anything, but some in the community have taken this position. I think this is technically true, but it's also misleading. Basically, we need to define what an Empyrean really is. Ranni said that she was once an Empyrean chosen by the fingers, meaning that she is no longer an Empyrean. However, Ranni is still able to ascend to full godhood, or greater divinity using DLC's term. The same is true for Miquella, who abandoned his Empyrean flesh, and most importantly his Empyrean eyes, a clear renunciation of his rights to inherit the Golden Order and the guidance of the fingers. Basically, Empyreanness does not necessarily equate to one's ability to attain godhood. It's just the title for those who can become god who has accepted the guidance of the fingers. But because those who can become god is rather mouthful, I think the community just collectively referred to them as Empyreans, which I think contributed to the confusion. To distinguish the two concepts, moving forward, I'll be referring to any candidates for godhood as true Empyreans, which would just be shortened to Empyreans, while those who have accepted the guidance of fingers as golden Empyreans. What role does the finger's guidance play in being an Empyrean? I believe this guidance is a form of fate, which in Elden Ring is intrinsically tied to one's body. Both Miklag and Ranni made a clear point to abandon their bodies so they can be rid of themselves of the finger's influence. And Radagon, Marika's body, is controlled and fully loyal to the Golden Order. Check out my previous video for more on that. Fate, in a very loose sense, can be interpreted as divine plan for one's life, especially in a universe where gods and eldritch entities are a real force. Ranni's whole quest revolves around moving her fate in motion and wielding her fate as a weapon in the form of the Finger Slayer blade found in Nokrum. This has significant lore implications, but another day. Fate very much plays a part in this deification ritual, but it wouldn't make sense to talk about it now without any context, so just keep that in the back of your mind for now. One thing we do know for sure about Empyreans is that they can take on different aspects within themselves. Lord God Miyazaki said it as much, and the Tarnished Archaeologist proposed that at least one of these aspects has to be female. I'm a firm believer of this idea. There's frankly a lot of evidence supporting TA's claim. I don't want to regurgitate his content, but check out his video if you want more on this idea. For now though, I want to expand a little on Lord God Miyazaki's interpretation of Empyreans. When he said Empyreans can take on different aspects, I think he's hyper-focusing on one specific case on how Empyreans actually work. We see countless iterations on taking on different aspect idea, from Godric to Rykard to the Spirit Tuners to Ghaffri and Siraj, and of course to the Shamans. And yes, this idea is definitely related to the Crucible. You could say that the Empyreans are a microcosm of the Crucible of life, both the body and the soul. They are a total representation of spirituality and divinity in this world, a walking, talking pocket universe. But obviously, Godric, Rykard, and Ghaffri are not Empyreans, nor do I think any of the Jar Shamans are. There is a palpable paradox here. How can you be a crucible where life blends together while maintaining a clearly defined individuality? How do you take on different aspects within yourself while remaining yourself? The conflict between collectivism and individuality has always been front and center of G.R.R. Martin's writing. Check out Sand King and you know what I mean. I think this conflict can be clearly seen from the design of Godric and the Jar Shamans. It's not a perfect blend, rather it's a monstrosity of pain and suffering. Sure, all of these people, who are more or less related to Marika, have a fraction of the true Empyrean power, but their power is imperfect. So, what is this true Empyrean power? What sets them apart from the rest? And why is it that this power makes them eligible to become a god? Well, as fellow Tarnished, you should be intimately familiar with the true Empyrean power. It is the same strength that allows you to ascend to the throne. The power of a true Empyrean is the strength of runes, the ability to turn runes into strength. This is by far the most complete integration of different aspects, if you stretch the definition of different aspect a bit. Remember, runes are souls and memories and fate, and it's what makes up the physical world. As a Tarnished, you can absorb runes of the enemies who fell, but you cannot digest these runes into yourself. You require the help of a Finger Maiden. This ties back to the idea that Empyreans have to be female, as only a maiden can turn runes into strength. Clearly, not every Finger Maiden is a true Empyrean. They are a proxy for Marika, and their services attest to their status. Melina's two jobs are helping us level up and telling us about the echoes of Marika. These maidens have all probably either gone through the Erdtree Rebirth, or have accepted the Blessed Sep, meaning they have all been soul merged with Marika. It is by Marika's Empyrean power that these Finger Maidens can turn runes into strength. I cannot stress enough how exclusive this power is. Even Godric, a golden lineage royalty, can only feebly and poorly imitate this power. Vare straight up told us that we will be helpless without a maiden, and therefore without the strength of runes. This is also why Melina asks you to share your thoughts and ambitions while she levels you up. You are shaping the disparate runes into your very being. You are willing them into shapes, just like how the Greater Will once wielded existence into being. And this ties back to the idea of fate. A fate, or a divine will, is what gives shapes to runes. The will literally embodies the people, and that's why the body is tied to fate. What essentially sets the Empyreans apart is that they can do this better than anyone else. they can integrate basic power, meaning runes, within themselves while retaining their own individual will. It is the combination of their individual will and a divine will, meaning fate, that allows them to perfectly integrate runes. Although this seems to be always a struggle. The mad taint of the great runes is said to drive the demigods mad after all, which would include especially Melania, another true Empyrean. Melania is a special case since her divine will goes against her own. Actually, all three of the true Empyrean successors each have a different attitude toward fate and divine guidance. Melania rejects it, Miquella seeks to become it, and Ranni creates one based on her own vision. But we will explore down this lane in a narrative analysis. As we will soon see, Empyreans not only can perfectly integrate runes into themselves, but they also can do so on a cosmic scale, but that's for later. It is, however, to my benefit, a simpler case with the Lord. The Lord does not require some special bloodline or any special ability. With enough homicidal tendency, it seems like any Joe Schmo can be chosen as the Lord. Look Exhibit A, the Tarnished of No Renown. A crown is warranted by strength alone after all, although since this is the premier job in the lands between, there's a pretty competitive selection process. Now we come to the stage. Now we climb that tower that reaches onto heaven, and inspect both in awe and horror the divine gateway. The whole deification process goes like this: funeral, resurrection, and divine union. We explain a bit about the resurrection part. Again, that's how it works in real life, so that's how it works in the game. I don't make the rules. But you see, the trick with resurrection is, well, coming back from the dead. Anyone can die, it's not special. Obviously, when Joe Schmo dies in the lands between, he just dies. He doesn't come back with the power to warp reality as he sees fit. Miquella was able to divest himself of his whole body, and yet by some miraculous reasons come back from the other side. To explain how the Empyreans could do this, we need to talk about mass sacrifice. To synthesize what we discussed before, when a person dies, his soul will naturally cross to the other side and reach the Crucible of Souls, where he will be melted down into base components, meaning runes without the memories of the person they used to be. Then these runes will be used as base components when another creature comes into being. When a mass sacrifice event occurs, the barrier between heaven and earth might have been opened wide enough to build a gateway between the two realms. That's why both the Earth Tree, the Divine Gateway, and to some extent the Nox Night Sky, all needed the bodies of the dead to melt together into this flesh abomination. The intrinsic pull between the spirit and their remains rip open a barrier between heaven and earth, and hence a gateway can be sustained between the two realms. Again, tying back to what we discussed before, the pull of the spirit to stay in the physical realm pulls heaven and earth closer together. The crucible of flesh will then serve as a conduit, or a gateway between the two realms. Some in the lore community believe that a mass sacrifice is needed so that the runes of the sacrifice can be absorbed by the Empyrean. This could be true, but I still think the primary function of the sacrifice is to build a gateway between the realms. Neither Miquella or Ranni performs a mass sacrifice at their ascension to godhood. Rather, they both pass through a gateway of which the sacrifice is built upon. You can imagine what happens when you melt the bodies of the dead into a shape of a gateway, in a land where the barrier between life and death is already thin as it is. The Empyreans, now properly sacrificed, have also reached onto the other side. They are now at the heart of the Crucible of Souls. To ascend to godhood, the Empyrean needs to channel the collective will of the runes in the Crucible, absorbing and integrating a massive amount of runes into their being, granting them a near infinite amount of power. It is soul merging at a massive scale, and again, only a true Empyrean can do this. We have arrived at the most crucial point of this whole ritual, the resurrection. Let us read the 1. Item description that FromSoft have generously blessed us with about this whole ritual. I'm not mad, why do you ask? The Secret Rite Scroll item description reads, a scroll made of white tree bark. Few can decipher the scroll, which describes the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, said to be found at the tower enshrouded by shadow. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. This is by far one of the most studied item descriptions in the DLC, so let us go line by line. The first line is fairly easy to interpret. A Lord will usher in a God's return, the God's return from the dead. But how is it that the Lord, who remember, is basically is able to do that? I'm going to pull the picture of a real item on screen, and for those of you who are just listening in, I urge you to look at the screen for a second. Now, without me telling you the name of this item, what do you think this is? Well, it is of course a bond stone. I mean, obviously, what else could it be? Do you not recognize that stereotypical milky white coloring of bond stones? Bond stone is the second part of a pair of items. Its counterpart, the sprite stone, we have discussed before. I would like to take a moment for us to appreciate FromSoft ingenuity in storytelling. This is what we're working with, folks. So, to put it in layman's terms, the bond stone reacts somehow with the spirit in the sprite stone, which facilitates the passing of the spirit in a violent reaction. Now, as an intelligent ape cursed with a pattern-recognizing brain, I am unfortunately beginning to connect some dots. I think the reason a Lord is required for God's return is because the union between a Lord and a God is a promise, or a vow, you may say, of new life. This vow energizes the soul absorbed in the Empyrean, which then generate the energy needed for the Empyrean to break through the barrier between life and death. Again, the passing of spirits between the realms is inherently a violent event. This is true whether the spirit is going to the spirit realm or coming back from the physical realm. The Divine Gateway 2 also make this crossing easier, as we have discussed before. I thought the Promise Consort boss fight has made this point pretty clear, at least to me, that Miquella was only able to come back because Radahn had beckoned him. After being defeated by us again in a much healthier body, Radahn's warrior spirit burns, and Miquella is ushered back from the dead in the spirit form, very dramatically walking through the Divine Gateway. Radahn had agreed to his part of the vow, becoming the consort of Miquella. The Deification Rituals requires the soon-to-be god to birth all that runes they have just collected. Remember, runes and souls are the same thing. The will of the rune, that is to say the will to exist, pulls the Empyrean toward the land of the living. The, let's say, male symbol energizes the spirit within the burrow because it's a sign of their rebirth. I can't really get more specific than that. I will leave the pleasures of connecting these dots to yourself. Remember, this is still a marriage ceremony, with all that a marriage ceremony should entail. Now, procreation in Elden Ring doesn't necessarily mean what it usually means. How Godfrey was able to procreate with the Earth Tree and have 3 sons is perhaps one of those lore questions that is best left unanswered. What is interesting though is that this framework adds another layer to what it means to be born by the god of the age, and perhaps offer insights to why Empyreans can give birth to more Empyreans. Since we only have Marika's rule to go off of, this framework also has interesting implications about the relationship between the demigods and their great runes. I hope to explore these topics in the future, but what do you guys think? I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Now to the second line. And the Lord's soul will require a vessel. On first reading, this line seems to be hyper-specific. It seems to be only talking about Miquella and how his promised consort Radahn is dead, and therefore needed a new vessel to exist in the physical world. But no, this ritual was written ages ago, so much so that few people can even read it. There's no mistake. This is part of the original plan, so let us break it down properly. First, much like the god, the Lord is also dead. For why else would the Lord's soul require a vessel? Second, the item specified that the Lord's soul requires a vessel, but not the god. Only one vessel is required of the two. The idea of requiring a vessel to contain Lord's soul so that sacred doors can be opened is something that FromSoft fans should be quite familiar with. There's an item in Dark Souls 1 called the Lord Vessel that lets you teleport between bonfires, and once filled with powerful souls, this item opens the gate to the Kiln of the First Flame, the most sacred place in the Dark Souls universe. I will leave these associations for you to ponder on. In the context of Elden Ring, judging how Miquella is clearly latching onto Radahn, the man and wife have quite literally become one flesh. When you kill Radahn, Miquella also dies. Miquella's anchor to this world is Radahn's body, or rather Milk's body, just like how Ranni needed a doll's body to latch on to the physical world. Something I imagine only spirit tuners of the highest pedigree can accomplish. Through wedlock, Miquella and Radahn's soul can latch onto the body of Milk together. I'm not going to write a full dissertation on how this relates to alchemy. Frankly, the alchemy rabbit hole frightens me, but luckily there are plenty of resources out there, and truly talented people have braved through the topic. If you need your alchemy fix, the wonderful YouTube channel Esoterica has a full course on Hermeticism and alchemy, and he is far more equipped with the professional knowledge on the subject than I can ever dream of. But anyway, put together these two ideas, the secret of the secret right scroll is revealed. A vow of life between Lord and God pull back the spirit of the God from the dead, and a physical vessel is needed to contain the two divine souls. Specifically, that the Lord needs a vessel is because, well, he needs the body to protect and enforce their new order. The Lord is the brawn of this relationship. He's the final line of defense to their newly formed order. As to why the Lord must also die, I don't have an especially elegant explanation other than what we discussed before, that resurrection is the trial of divinity. Since Lord and God both are just one part of this greater divinity, it stands to reason that they must go through the same trial of resurrection. I do think though that the Lord is brought back from the dead via the power of Empyreans as super spirit tuners. Like how Rani was able to possess the body of a doll, Mikola essentially possesses the body of Moog with the Radon's soul. I admit it's a bit of a weak link in the theory, so I'll be happy to hear your thoughts on the matter. If this whole ritual is performed without a hiccup, the Lord and God becomes a conduit between heaven and earth, life and death. And now both death and life can go through them. The God essentially becomes the mother of all life, at least all life that's gone through their chosen system. It's very abstract, so let us just use Marika for example. Marika's order is the Earth Tree. By brute force, the Earth Tree replaces all rituals of life and death, consolidating them into Earth Tree births and Earth Tree burials. And the Earth Tree is a surrogate for Marika's womb. It's a whole different thing. Check out Tia's video if you're interested. So with their chosen order and their chosen lord, the once Empyrean now controls the power over life and death. But in a broader sense, the control over life and death is really the control over the flow of runes. And since runes are the basic units of existence, it stands to reason that this god now controls existence itself. There is one last point I want to mention, and I think the keen-eyed viewers might have already caught on, as I have been alluding to this point throughout the video. We've talked about how the Crucible of Souls is like places of afterlife. We've also talked about how the fate of the Empyreans is crucial during their ascension. But there is actually another unspoken connection between the two ideas. For you see, there are many different spirit realms. When we arrive at our final battle, we walk through the gate of the Earth Tree, and after we defeat Radagon, we are transported into the celestial realm where the Elden Beast resides. Presumably, this is the part of the spirit realm controlled by the Elden Beast and the Fingers. And as the story's trailer suggests, this is where Marika went to when she ascended to godhood. But this place is decisively not where Mikola and Rani go to when they ascend. We don't see where Mikola goes, but in the Age of Star Ending, we do see where Rani goes. Here, finally, the majesty of the ever so elusive Dark Moon is revealed. So the question arises, when you open gate and cross the threshold, that's the secular reference for the day, how do you know where you're going? The key to the gates of heaven is quite literally the fate of the Empyreans. It is the core reason as to why both Mikola and Rani have to abandon their flesh, and subsequently their golden fate. To be a god in this world is to transcend above humanity, to become Ubermensch, whose will is so strong that they bend reality into their shape. The story of the Empyreans, Marika, Mikola, and Rani, is one of a hero's journey, not the self-sacrificing heroes as we traditionally define them, but Nietzschean heroes, heroes that are all sacrificing. Just like how once a greater will fractured the universe into being, the fate of the Empyreans, their thoughts, their ambitions, and the principles they will follow, their Nietzschean pursuit to shape the world in their image, is the key to their divinity. But, as they say, that's a story for another day. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the tremendous support you guys have shown on my first YouTube video. This video kind of spawned out of my research into Mesmer and the Serpents. As you can see, it's too much content to be squished into that video, but I think this is crucial information to discuss. It kind of lays the foundations to all of my other theories. If you like the content, I will appreciate it if you do the YouTube thing, like and subscribes and all that. I have a lot of video ideas for this channel, and I can't wait to share it with you all. Also, I wanted to rush this video out before the new year. You guys will know if I've succeeded or not, but the editing of this video is pretty simple, so I apologize if the visuals of this video isn't as good as it can be. The audio quality also isn't in its best shape. I've blown into the mic a couple of times. The AI voice bot that I purchased suddenly needed to breathe for some reason, so I apologize on its behalf. Again, thank you for watching the video. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.